Welcome to Mindvine, a mental health podcast for everyone. Since our first episode in 2016, we have been sharing stories of recovery, engaging with experts, and tackling the stigma associated with mental illness. The Mindvine podcast is produced by Ontario Shore's Centre for Mental Health Sciences and is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Welcome to the Mindvine podcast. This is episode 93, and our guest is one that always makes me nervous because when we have somebody on the podcast who does radio or TV, which this guy does a bit of both sometimes, but he's predominantly Sportsnet Central host. He's an author, proud native of Pictou County, Nova Scotia, because he always references it during the highlights. I'm pleased to welcome Ken Reid. Hi, Ken.
Don't be nervous, Darryl. Nothing to be nervous about.
I'll work my way through it. It's as I mentioned before, I'm wearing this shirt in your honor because I grew up in Sudbury, and I'm very proud of that. And so anytime I mention that I'm from Sudbury, anybody says, I know, I'm aware because I mention it so often. And I feel like you're kind of in the same category. You're very proud of where you came from, and you use every opportunity to reference your hometown.
I do. I think it's a small town thing. Everyone from a small town tends to be proud of where they're from, and just I know everyone thinks everyone from Nova Scotia is related. So your East Coast lifestyle shirt, Alex, who runs East Coast Lifestyle, his dad used to be my dentist. So there you go. There's always a connection. There's always a connection. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. If you tell me you're Eddie Shack's nephew, then that'd be really crazy.
I have met Eddie Shack, and I'm not his nephew. There were more than a few stories that were memorable from those exchanges.
Oh yeah. Eddie always brought stories with him, and created stories. That was the magic of Eddie Shack, right? You just didn't meet him; you walked away with a story.
Yeah, actually, he was one of the, not to get derailed, but he was probably one of the most gracious human beings I ever met.
Wow,
really nice guy.
He was awesome. I got a chance to write a book with him right before he passed away, so it was awesome. It was like Eddie's last twirl, his last lap. So he enjoyed it, and then cancer.
Well, that's an honor, at least to have done that with him. So we're getting a little off track, but we're going to talk sports and all sorts of things, because that's your life. It's actually a huge part of my life too. But today we're talking mental health, and it was about a year ago, maybe 13 months ago, that you kind of came on the scene as somebody with a mental health connection, and just wondering if you could talk about your journey with mental health a little bit to start us off.
Sure. So you're referring to that story in the Toronto Star. It was early December, I guess 13, 14 months ago, but I'd been talking about it openly for 5-6 years before that. I would do it would come up from time to time. Shane Corson and I would do talks. Shane and I pretty much similar journey, but it never was really out there for everyone to see. It's funny when you do something in print, it just has this amazing impact. So the Star contacted me about doing a story, and I was kind of lukewarm to doing it. I didn't want a woe is me story, and but then I talked to my wife, and she said, do it because maybe it'll help some other people. So I kind of did it with that, and that's kind of what Michael Landsberg's been doing since the start. And so I threw it out there. The reaction was really good. I'd like to think it helped some people, touched some people. But I guess my mental health story would I was a normal kid. I had an awesome childhood in Pictou, Nova Scotia, road hockey, baseball, fishing, golf, baseball cards, hockey cards, everything that you think a small town kid would do. Then around, I guess, 13, 14, I kind of went into this weird shell. I got awkward. I had a weird growth spurt. I had to get glasses. The classic teenage story. And then I don't know what prompted it, but I just became just so full of anxiety and fear, and do people like me, what's wrong with me, that kind of stuff. I just became instantly shy, had a real awkward high school adventure. I get to university, and I had no confidence in myself, just didn't want to go out. And then, you just, like a lot of kids in school, you discover drinking, and when you drink, you feel good, but then when you wake up the next day, you feel worse. And I got into this spiral of just feeling horrible about myself all the time, and I didn't really know what it was. I went through university. I remember I'd walk to class with my hat down like that in hopes that nobody would know who I was or see me. And I didn't like myself, and I didn't really know what it was. And it just continued. It just continued. And I was maybe 22, 23. I opened up to my father. I remember, just bawling and I don't like myself. I don't feel good. I never feel good about myself. What's wrong? So he put me onto a doctor, and I went and discussed it with a doctor for a couple of meetings, and I thought, okay, I'm cured. He told me it might be this. I remember dysthymia, I think was the term he used. And I'm like, okay, well, now I know what to do. And I didn't. So then the trend continues. And I got to my early 30s, and I would keep having episodes of not wanting to get out of bed some days, high anxiety, feeling horrible about myself. And one day my wife said, this is enough. You got to call a doctor. Because, I'd feel good for a while, and then I'd go back into these spirals. Feel good, go back into these spirals. So she said kind of enough is enough, because she knew what was going on, but she didn't know how to treat me, right? You can talk to somebody, but ultimately you got to get a pro to help you out. So I yellow paged the nearest doctor, went and made an appointment. I met with her just yesterday. I've been going to her for 10, 11 years now. And it started as go in and cure me, and that's not what it was. So it was a long journey, and eventually I got on some medication, and I remember going to my doctor and just going, I just want to feel normal. I want to have normal bad days. Because, for people with mental health, their bad days can just be these pits as opposed to just having a bad day. So now when I have a bad day, for the most part, it's just a bad day. And I'm armed, I'd like to think, from going to my doctor for 10 years I'm armed with the ability and the weapons to fight off these bad days. And I kind of know when something's coming on. And I know not to go out drinking with my buddies till 4 a.m, because the next day I won't feel good, and then that'll linger, and that'll lead to different stuff. So it's been long, but the last 10 years have been, for the most part, really good. And I mean, I used to be just full of anxiety and just pits in my stomach and worrying about things that didn't garner worry. And now it's just, you still have bad days, but at least when I go through my bad days now, I know how to fight them. So it was long, and it took me a long time to get my stuff together. I'd say I was in a really bad spot, probably from 17, 18 years old to 31, 32. And now I'm a happy guy. I got 2 kids and a nice wife and picket fence. Well, no picket fence, but everything's pretty good for the most part.
You could have a picket fence if you wanted.
If I took some money out of the bank, I could build a picket fence. Yes.
Yeah. When you talk about kind of your journey, and it's very common for people who are struggling with mental health issues to kind of be unarmed, right? You're going through this, yes, and you don't have forget about medication. You don't have any tools,
yes,
to kind of manage your health. And once you're you talk about medication, but there's other tools that you would employ to manage your health. And when you have that kind of package of tools of things you can do to manage your health, like how empowering is it compared to where you were 10, 15 years ago?
It's great. I was a self-medicator, right? Like a lot of young people through your 20s, you're going out to the bar after work, you think you're having a great time. You are. There's some good times in there, don't get me wrong, but you're kind of only feeling good when you're self-medicating. So now, I mean, there's just these little things that, I remind myself all the time. Control what you can control. It's a simple message, but it's kind of hard to master. And, a little discipline, knowing what you can do, what you can't do. And just, once you get armed with these things, you feel better. And I can't really, it's weird, I can't really tell you what they are other than what I just said, but over the course of going to my doctor for all these years, you just kind of learn to just live and not let these other things bother you. And don't get me wrong, medication helps too, because it's a chemical thing, right? So for me anyway, and I remember being shy to tell my psychologist that I was on medication from my GP. And she's like, well, what's wrong with that? It's just another tool. And I just have a feeling of comfort now. And I think getting on medication really just helped me get that feeling of comfort. I was reluctant for a long time to get on medication because pills are for people that are weak. I don't need pills. I can do it without pills. And I'm like, but now I've learned enough. I'm like, well, if you have a broken leg, you'd probably take an aspirin and then they treat your leg. So to me, it's no different. So I'm sure my Cipralex or whatever it's called is working wonders up here, and I'm armed with other wonders from my doctor. Control you can control. And I remember one day going in and just telling my doctor, my mom's a worrywart. I come from a long line of worrywarts. I'm a worrywart. And she said, you don't have to be a worrywart. And I thought, oh, that for me was like this light that came on. And it's a simple message, but it's true. And then you learn to just kind of let things go in a lot of ways. And, you learn what you can and cannot do. Like, we live in this very divisive world now. I think social media is the worst thing to happen to humanity ever, next to the creation of the internet. I'm contractually obligated to have a Twitter account, okay? So I try to stick to sports. When I stick to sports, I'm generally pretty happy. Like last night I tweeted out Barry Bonds doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, so people came at me, but it's sports opinions. But when you get into politics and other things, it creates divides. I love hockey fights, but I don't like fighting myself. I don't like getting into confrontations, so I just kind of try to steer clear of this. So I think one of the things I'm armed with is knowing where I should and should not go, because I don't want to put myself into a situation where I'm going to start twirling and feeling horrible about myself. But sometimes it still happens, and when it happens, you have to go, okay, this is what's happening. I'm aware of what's happening, instead of just immediately going into that pit.
Mm-hmm. Well, and your Twitter account is also full of wrestling references, which I appreciate
See,
as well.
Wrestling makes me happy. That's where I should go. Wrestling and hockey cards, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, judging by your references on your show and on Twitter, we're not too far off the same vintage. Growing up in the 80s and early 90s.
Yes.
And I know from my experience, mental health was, it wasn't even a term, when I was growing up. And, all those cliches that we talk about that we saw in movies like stiff upper lip and don't cry and not that I actually remember my parents telling me any of those things, but those were the things that I believed as a kid. And, many of us growing up in that era did. When you're going through this and then, you're going through this your whole life, right? Not just when you were a teenager going through an awkward phase, and not just when you were receiving help. Like you mentioned, you're going through it now when you're managing your mental health on a day-to-day basis. But I wonder, did stigma or shame, did that factor into your decision making or prevent you from getting help? In your 20s as opposed to when you were in your early 30s or whatever the case may be.
I think so. When you grew up in the 80s, there was bad terms. No one said mental health. They'd say you're nuts or something stupid like that. And so I think at first you'd think, okay, I can control this. Okay, it's not a big deal. And why is this happening to me? Okay, this is just a phase. And then it keeps happening, and I think eventually, if you just don't reach out to somebody, you're going to have a breakdown. And I had a breakdown, I was bawling in front of my dad. I'd be bawling in front of my friends. And I think for me, it just came to a head where I grew up. I was kind of sick of living like that. And I had to do something because I knew, I can't keep going on like this. And when my wife told me, I'm like, okay, I have to do it. But yeah, there was massive stigmas growing up. You wouldn't. My mom, when she saw that, the newspaper article, called me bawling. How come I didn't know? I feel horrible. I'm like, Mom, it's not your fault. I didn't tell you. Mm-hmm. How can you know? So if you don't tell somebody, they don't know. And you can want to be the greatest singer in the world, but if you don't tell somebody or try singing, you're not going to be the greatest singer in the world. So it's the same thing with mental health. If you don't tell somebody, they're probably not going to know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would tell. I remember telling my dad there when I mentioned I was 22, 23, and I never really brought it up with my mom much because I was afraid it would hurt her. And my brother kind of shares a similar journey to me, and he and I would talk about it. He and I would basically talk each other down. And that becomes heavy because I'm holding his burden, he's holding mine. But it's when you just get it out there, it's easier. So I'm so happy now we're at a point in time where it's okay to talk about it, and that like it's amazing like you think you're alone, right? But you're not. Like there's unfortunately a lot of people that go through this, and my God, the last 2 years, I shudder to think of what the consequences of the last 2 years are going to be on young people, kids, people in universities, things like that. But thank goodness we can talk about it now, because for years you couldn't, and for years you didn't want to. And now I think we're at a point now where it's like, yeah, it's okay. Let me know. Where for years it was like, okay, you just don't talk about that.
Yeah, it's your comment about the internet and social media. I would probably agree with like 50% because there's so much complexities to it.
Yeah.
But personally, one of the things I like about social media in this age is you can be whoever you are, right? You can be yourself, and in social media you can put yourself out there if you want to, or the internet, like you did with the Toronto Star article. And whereas you wouldn't have had that tool before, or that outlet. We work a lot with patients and people who have gone through a recovery journey with mental illness, and who have shared their stories, and they all have different experiences. Almost all of them are predominantly positive in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
They're touching people's lives. When that article comes out with you sitting on the bench and the Toronto Star, and like I know you did some follow-up stories with Rogers outlets and so forth. What was the reaction? What was your experience after kind of that was published?
It was pretty great. It was pretty amazing. I mean, I had calls right away that day. Michael Landsberg reached out, which meant a lot. I remember the first time I met Michael, I used to work at TSN, and he was wandering around. I actually went up into his dressing room and told him, hey, thank you for doing what you do. This is be like, I don't know, 2010 maybe. Thank you for doing what you do. It means a lot to somebody like me. Like, I just wanted to thank him, because without Michael, I wouldn't have done that article. And I feel like you're stealing some of his thunder in a way, but it's like, no, there's lots of room to share lots of stories. And I got phone calls that day, from colleagues, from people I haven't talked to in a while. I got emails, tweets, retweets, but like, it sounds selfish, but when you're out in public and someone will come up and talk to you and say, hey, I read that article, thank you. That means a lot. And I was at a ball game in the country this summer, and a dad came up to me, hey, thanks for that article. My son is going through the same thing. He was playing out on the ball field. He was a kid, and it's like, man, it's everywhere. So that was beyond positive. I'd say I had one negative thing said at me, but again, there was a time when that one negative would put me down, and I was just like, whatever. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I can't control that opinion, but I can control how I react to it. So that's something I've learned. So yeah, it was pretty incredible. I was a little reluctant to do the story again, because I didn't want to be a victim. I didn't want to be, people feel sorry for me. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. But again, if you throw it out there and you can say, hey man, I'm pretty happy now. I went through some crap for a long time, and there was no one real thing that just kind of put me over. It was just this place I was in, and it's hard to explain why to some people, but it's just like, if you suffer from anxiety, depression, it is what it is. So I just wasn't this happy guy, and there was a Robin Williams picture I just tweeted out. I think it was something to the effect of nobody fakes depression. People fake being happy. So be kind. And I was like, oh my God. And I kept saying in the article, I would wear a mask for years. And that's what it was. Like, if you saw me, you'd think I was a happy guy, but I was almost like the sad clown. And now when you see me, if I'm happy, I'm happy. If I'm not, I'm not. I'm not going to put it on anymore. And putting it on was exhausting. Like, it was tiring. But then the way that doing that article was, I don't want to say liberating, but it's nice to be able to just talk about it and not hide it, and I guess that would be my big coming out party, that article. But for years before, I'd been talking about it, but when you put it on that big stage, you're kind of worried about how it's going to turn out and stuff, but it turned out great. And I was more than happy with the reaction. Yeah.
Well, I remember when it came out, for a lot of reasons. One, anytime somebody with notoriety comes out about their mental health story, like us in communications are, fairly excited, just to have another advocate. But
Yeah.
you're unique in a sense because your on-screen personality is so like boisterous, and you can be silly sometimes, and you're high energy, and it just didn't seem like, for somebody that's not familiar with mental illness, the two don't jive, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not the Ken Reid I know watching on TV.
Yeah.
And I think for some it might have been hard to, I guess, to reconcile that, but for others it probably spoke to like
Yeah.
the mask they wear, right? Like it must
Yeah,
have been an
totally.
interesting experience for people around you too, that when
Yeah.
you're wearing those masks, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, it just kind of dawned on me right now when you say that. It's like ever since I kind of got over that hump, and I'd say I got over the hump probably 2 or 3 years into talking to my psychologist. So let's call it, I don't know, 35 or something, somewhere around in there. And this is just dawning on me now. So from day of birth to 12, 13 years old, I'm just the happiest kid, right? I'm cool. And I guess now I feel like that kid again, right? And there was this gap in there for, I don't know, however many years, let's call it 15, 20 years, where I was just not that guy. And now what you see on TV, I always tell aspiring broadcasters, I go, you guys ever hear of Audio Slave? And, they're all 20 years old. They're like, no. I'm like, okay, that's this old band from 2006. And I go, they have this great lyric, to be yourself is all that you can do. And once you figure out on TV to be yourself, you're either going to have success or you're going to fail. But at least you'll fail or succeed as your own. So when you see me on TV and I'm pumped and I'm psyched up and I'm reading hockey highlights, that's me. Now, if I feel a little subdued right now, it's because I just got up half an hour ago and because I work till 3 a.m. So when I'm pumped up doing hockey highlights, that's me. And that was me when I was like a kid watching hockey, right? And to me, I'm a pretty happy guy right now for the most part. And that's, I guess, my mental makeup now is kind of the same I was when I was a kid. Bad days would happen, but I figure it out. And, I don't cry and scream and yell when I don't get a toy anymore, but I'm not full of anxiety and dread. And I'm not, my gut isn't like turning constantly. I don't sweat when I'm not supposed to. It's just, and a lot of it comes, I think, with just realizing that, I am who I am. Take it or leave it. I'll be nice to you. I can't control what you think. I can control what I think. The meds are probably working wonders, I hope. They're definitely helping, and just discussing my problems. So like when I go to my doctor now, I mean, some days I go in there and I'm like, I don't really have much. And we just start chatting. And then I'll go, oh yeah. Yesterday I was in there and there was this thing I was dealing with. And I brought it up to her several times. And I went in yesterday and 35 minutes in she asked me and I thought, oh yeah, that thing. And it was like, I guess I've moved on. And whereas before things would just hang with you, and I'm just so glad. It's, I guess when you finally address your mental health, and like I'm not perfect, but I think I'm normal, and I think what I always wanted to be was normal. And when I used to look at normal people, I'm like, wow, they had a bad day, and the next day they're good, and they dealt with it. And I used to sit in my room or lay awake in bed at night, just going, can I be normal? Why is this bothering me? Why do I feel this way? Why do the littlest things bother me? I used to get off if I made a mistake on a sportscast and just freak out and I'd be angry and I'm such a loser. And now I'm like, I made a mistake. Move on, And I'm in a business where if you mispronounce a name, people will tweet at you and call you a moron and an idiot. And I'm like, do you know how many names there are in the world? There's a lot of names. So yeah, I'm gonna screw up. And things like that used to bother me, and the perception of others used to bother me, but now it's I just kind of let it go, and I was able to let it go just through a lot of work, but it was very rewarding, and I'm glad I'm just kind of normal, I guess. normal as I am ever going to be anyway.
I kind of mentioned, the industry a little bit. As a kind of a consumer of like news and sports news,
Yeah.
I really noticed, kind of, it seems like a purposeful move, obviously, towards diversity in terms of on-screen personalities, but also allowing personalities to show their personalities and be human, whether they're on the screen or in social media or, there's a litany of podcasts out there where people are expressing their personal views or giving kind of insights into their life. And you're now part of that, right? Like you mentioned Michael Landsberg. There was he used to be the lone wolf, kind of in this sphere for.
Salute to Michael, man. He was our Braveheart. He started it all. He was the lone wolf, and he's got a big posse with him now, I guess.
Do you feel that, whether it's, from a mental health perspective or just, inclusivity or diversity, that things are shifting? And are you happy with the way, the speed at which things are changing?
Yeah, I think it definitely shifted. It's okay to talk about it now. It's all right. I remember having a horrible time in Edmonton once when I lived there, and I hadn't told anyone about what I was going through, and going to my news director and just kind of saying, man, I need a day. I'm not there. And I opened up to him, and he was like, you take as much time as you want. He was this great guy. And now you have companies saying, if you need a day, right? Or let's be aware of this. So yeah, there's a shift for sure. It's nice that employers don't need their anchors to be those old concrete classic news anchors we used to have that were almost robots. My employer lets me be the absolute moron and idiot that I am. What you see is what you get. If you think I'm an idiot on TV, you'd think I was an idiot in person, because, again, I think something that probably contributed to my anxiety early on in my career was I wanted to be a sportscaster. When now I just realize I'm me and I happen to be a sportscaster, right? Like you'd go on, you're trying to sound a certain way when you do the news. And now I'm like, well, this is my nasally maritime voice, take it or leave it. So, employers are better now, and they're aware that mental health is important. I mean, if you take care of if I was an employer and I took care of my employees' mental health, I think it would help my bottom line. No sick days, you just spend a little to get a lot. So I think it makes financial sense too. But it's nice that on a human level, it's there more than anything. And yeah, I think, look, there's always room to improve anything. My sculpted body, man, I can sit here right now or I can work on it, but there's always room for improvement. But I'm very happy where we're at right now with, I don't know, there's employers care for the most, there's always going to be exceptions. Nobody's perfect. But when you're having a bad day, you're allowed to have a bad day now. And as Michael says, it's okay not to be okay. And I think people are realizing that.
Yeah, you mentioned Shane Corson.
Yeah.
Working with him. He's been on our podcast. Kelly Rudy's been on our podcast, and he's talked a lot about his own mental health struggles himself and within his family. It really seems like it's growing, like the number of people who are willing to share their personal experience. Do you think we have much further to go, or what would you like to see us kind of tackle next?
Don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, it's interesting. Like I would like to see provincial health authorities cover like OHIP. When I go to my psychologist, I got to pay. I'm fortunate. I'm in a position where I can afford that. There's people that are not. I think mental health should be covered by provincial health care. I guess that's where I would like if you were to ask me what one thing would you like to see, I'd like to see that. But but when you see a guy like Kelly, say he suffers from mental health, I mean, when you see Kelly and when you meet Kelly, he's the most positive, uplifting guy you're ever going to meet. Same with Corse. Like Shane Corson he's a beautiful person. And fortunate, Shane and I have done talks in front of people where I interview Shane the same way you're interviewing me. And I always say the difference between Shane and I is 10 years. He's way better at hockey and he's far more handsome. Other than that, like, our journey is like, it's so similar. The anxiety, and it happened at the same age, and like everything hit ahead. laying in bed wondering what's wrong with you when you're just a good person, and you just got to reach out and just say, look, I need help, instead of trying to do it yourself. And that was Shane, that was me. But yeah, if I would like to see one thing change, I would love for someone to be able to go to a psychologist, or it's like whatever the term is, and you don't have to shell out $250 or whatever the cost is. You're reimbursed, or it's on your health card. That's the one thing I would like to change, because OHIP covers a broken leg, so they should cover this thing as well.
Well, there's lots of data to suggest, like for employers, that you take care of your employees' mental health, productivity is going to increase. Right?
Yeah.
Being somebody who shared their story, and we talked about Michael Landsberg, and that kind of being the only person in that space for quite some time. When you think back to your maybe your earlier years when you're first struggling with this, because now we see people of all ages sharing their story. Just last week we had a young man who was 22 talking about his journey at 14, 15.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have helped you at all? Like, do you think if you would have saw somebody that looked or sounded like you, who wasn't ashamed and being upfront, would have helped you back then?
I think so. I'd like to think so. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just sat in my room and didn't go out and wondered what was wrong. And there wasn't that person that I can think of then. I mean, I collected Corey Hirsch hockey cards. Little did I know that Corey was going through this thing when he was just starting with the New York Rangers. I watched Michael Landsberg on TV. I didn't know. I watched Kelly with his headband. And it just wasn't stuff we talked about then. But like we said earlier, there was this stigma then. I remember you would just use the term crazy, and if someone seeked mental health, they'd use the term crazy. And I remember going past the mental health hospital in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. There was a nickname for the place. I remember people chanting at a goalie at a junior game when I was a kid. I'll use what they just yelling at the kid because apparently he had a breakdown, and the whole crowd screaming at him. And that was kind of like, well, geez, I don't want to be that guy. I can't tell anybody. So I'm glad that there's people out there that can look at somebody who's got a bit of a public persona, and they can say, yeah, I guess I'm not alone. And that's what the importance of doing that story is. And like when Michael put himself out there, that was such a strong thing to do. And I remember watching an episode of Off the Record when he had Stéphane Richer on, and Stéphane saying, he just started speeding in his car hoping he would crash. And Stéphane Richer was my guy, man, number 44. And seeing that helped me a lot. And that would have been, geez, he would have had Stéphane on Off the Record, I'm guessing 06, maybe around there. Maybe,
somewhere around there.
Yeah, and that seeing Stéphane Richer say that to me was like, what? Like Mr. 50 goals for the Montreal Canadiens, him too? He was my guy, man. I had a Stéphane Richer t-shirt. And so that helped me. So yeah, obviously I think if a young kid seeing someone talk about it now, that's helping them. And it's funny, I don't really step back and think about it that way. What if I was 14 and I saw that? But yeah, I think it would help. So it's funny, you don't want to say the more the merrier. You don't want more people suffering from mental health. But I think for those of us who are dealing with it, you might as well open up about it. Like Kendra Fisher, great goaltender. And
also on our podcast at one point.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. And Kendra had to deal with stuff that basically took her off Team Canada. Kendra and I have spoken, and man, same again, right there with her. Same deal. And it definitely would have helped now that I think back about it. But that's a good thing. That means we're evolving. It means we're open to speak about it.
One of the more interesting guys today is Robin Leonard. He's the goalie for the Vegas Golden Knights, who's been open about his battle and struggles with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And have you been on his Twitter feed at all?
Yes.
Have you seen like the
Yes.
guy? The guy is an open book.
He's an
not
open
just
book.
not just about mental health issues, but he'll answer any question honestly that you ask him.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what you think of the way he's dealt with his own mental health and the way he's kind of approached it.
I think it's liberating, right? He just puts it out there, man. Hey, I'm bipolar goalie. Look at Mauro Ranallo, the bipolar rock and roller, I think he calls himself, the boxing announcer. And Robin puts it out there, and he will go at people. He'll voice his opinion on the game, and again, whatever helps you. And I think whatever persona he's put out there, I think he's an open book, and I think he chooses to do it on social media. That's cool. I try not to interact too much on the social media thing. It just doesn't make me feel good, but maybe it makes him feel good. So if whatever works for you, I think is how I would go about it. But I like that Robin's very open about, I'm bipolar. This is what I deal with. Take it or leave it. And I think that is probably liberating. It goes back to be yourself is all that you can do. That's who he is. So I'm sure for years he wasn't, I'm guessing, comfortable putting that out there. But when you put it out there and it's like, hey man, take it or leave it. I can't control how you feel about me, but I can't control how I feel about you. And, if somebody doesn't like me, I can't do much about that. If somebody doesn't like Robin, he can't do much about that, but he can at least be true to himself. And the funny thing is, for most people who interact with me on Twitter or whatever, say you suck, if they meet you, they go, oh, you're not that bad a guy.
Yeah, they still want to meet you. They just,
it's like, so yesterday, I tweeted out Barry Bonds, I don't think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think the Hall of Fame got it right. That's a sports opinion. So I wake up today and you'll read your mentions and someone's like, you're a moron. And I'm like, okay, I might be a moron, but that opinion I don't think makes me a moron. We just differ. So if this person met me on the street, they probably wouldn't come up and say you're a moron. And if they did, they're entitled to it as well. But yeah, I like what Robin Leonard does because I think he's being true to himself. So I think that's an empowering thing. It makes you feel better, man, when you can just put it out there. I don't care anymore.
He's part of a generation, like just to maybe go to sports for a second, strictly sports, I guess, although there's probably parallels. He's part of a generation of hockey players that aren't from the same mold that 10, 15, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think of like Jack Hughes and Austin Matthews and some of these guys that are active on social media and are Trevor Zegras will try different things and kind of show their personality. I wonder what you think of that, as somebody in sports broadcasting, and also, somebody who's being true to yourself, right? It seems like these guys are being true to themselves, in terms of their personalities.
That's just it. I mean, I'm old, right? And if that's how the boys want to get through the day, have at her. Be yourself, man. I mean, it's funny when you look at old interviews from Wayne Gretzky when he was 17, 18. He was a pretty confident kid. These are confident kids. I love it. Brad Marchand grabs a guy's phone the other night, starts talking to it. I love that. That's great. Why not? And then there's other guys who aren't on social media at all. And that's fine too. Have at it. I mean, I don't really care what a player wears to the rink. I'm a suit guy, right? I want you wearing a suit, but hey, man, if you want to wear some weird pants that are cut off at your knees, sneakers, have at it. Who am I to say, right? So, yeah, and if you're just being yourself, I think that's a liberating thing. And for a lot of people struggle with mental health, I think they're afraid to be themselves. I know I was just afraid to be myself, and the mask I wore was just such a burden. And maybe that's what Robin went through. I mean, years ago on the ice, if someone found out you were bipolar, I'm sure they'd be chirping you and they'd be screaming at you. Fans would be screaming at you. And Robin's kind of like, yeah, this is who I am. Whatever. So if you want to talk about how far we've come, think about that. An NHL goalie admitting he's bipolar. That means we've come a long way.
In the prime of his career, not doing it at the end or when it's over. And
right. That shows you how far we've come. So good on him for being a leader.
Yeah. The one, I know you're a father, of young children, and I just think about, being sports obsessed. It sounds like we had very similar childhoods, right? and wait for the paper on Saturday to come out so I could memorize all the baseball
Yeah.
stats from all
Yeah.
the teams, right? Like
Yeah.
that was my life. And the image of athletes who were, my role models and idols was very like, scripted and sculpted, right? They were cut from a
Yes.
certain
Yes.
mold, right? And if you feel like you don't fit into it, it makes you feel like you don't fit into it, right? Like that you're an outsider to some degree. And today, whether it's those guys or what you see, like what Simone Biles did during the Olympics with her mental health, or even just in terms of their personalities alone, just being themselves and not being constricted to a mold. And as a father, I'm like, I like that. I like that my kids can they can find the role model that suits their own personality. I wonder, how you feel about that.
That's a great point. I mean, if you go back a generation before us, the way the media wrote about players, like Mickey Mantle was the golden child. He was this blonde New York Yankee, the perfect specimen. Mickey Mantle was a flawed man. I mean, we've learned that now. But for my dad's generation, if he grew up looking at Mickey Mantle was this perfect human specimen. So then I guess you got to be a perfect human specimen. But Mickey Mantle wasn't a perfect human specimen. Mickey Mantle was a flawed man, flawed like the rest of us. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, you'd hear, "Oh, that player smoked cigarettes," and you'd be thinking, "Oh my God!" So, but they kind of got out, right? Now that's a great point. My little guy, I have two. The oldest is just a sports fanatic. The other guy could care less. But yeah, when he's grown up looking at players that are cut from different molds, right? And the media is telling you their stories, and the players are telling you their own stories via their own social media feeds. And like the story of the hockey player growing up on the farm, I'm like, Austin Matthews from Arizona. Things change. And the narrative has changed, and players are their own personalities now, and I think that's good for kids. It's good for kids to see that they can fit in. There kind of is no mold anymore for the perfect athlete, whereas when we were kids, there still was. Go back a previous generation, there totally was. But we know about guys, what makes them tick, what their personalities are. Where before it was kind of like, okay, the perfect human specimen, and it's like, there really wasn't such a thing, even though we were told there was.
Yeah, it was just here's their poster, and all of a sudden they were born and ended up scoring 160 points in the league, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I like the authenticity.
Yes.
There, like when you said earlier that the world's divided, I agree. I think there's so many mixed pieces in the world today, and one of the things that I do like is you can, for the most part, there is a certain level of authenticity. We may not like how authentic somebody is, but they can be real and unlikable. But they're not trying to be somebody they're not, right? You think about Dennis Rodman.
Yeah.
But like today, he wouldn't even, like, him and Ron Artest would just be, they would just be guys, right?
Yeah.
But back when they were playing, they were such big deals because they were so different.
That's true too. I mean, basketball's it seems to always be at the forefront of guys being themselves, which is a good thing. Every sport's different too, right? The personalities in sports, like, okay, in basketball, I kind of get why guys can be a little more individualistic, because a superstar can play 40 minutes of a 48-minute game, and he can dictate it. Where in hockey, I kind of get why it's a little more. The guys are a little more uniform, because the best player can only play 25 minutes of the 60-minute game. So it all makes sense in a way.
There's more plugs on a team than superstars. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right? That's what my P's for, plug.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I could probably go forever, but seeing as you just woke up half an hour ago, I'll give you time.
Yeah, late nights, man. Late nights.
To get yourself together for
Look
work.
Look at the bedhead. Look at that.
Well, if I had bedhead, I'd wear it proudly. Yeah. With pride, I mean. But thanks, Ken. Really appreciate your honesty. And when people like you share their story, like, I know you got a lot of feedback from your network and people on social media, but I know there's thousands, if not many more, that were impacted by it and remember that, and you're making a difference by being so honest. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Darryl. And yeah, if anyone's struggling, the first step is to reach out, and then I always say, like, if you want to get better at hockey, I can listen to my son. I can give him a few tips, but you should probably see a pro. So if you can't, see a pro.
I might tell my son that later today. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Thanks, Darryl.
thank you very much.
Okay, buddy.
Begins in the